simply the chief monster. Cotter says the prosecution made no excuses to the jury about the character of their star witness.
You don't trust a Sammy Gravano. You don't trust an informer. I don't, anyway. I don't know any responsible prosecutor who does. You trust them when you know they're telling the truth because you've proven it through unimpeachable sources.
At the Gotti trial, those sources were the eavesdropping tapes made by the FBI. Not only had the feds bugged Gotti's principal hangout, the Ravenite Social Club, the agents had even managed to sneak a microphone into the apartment above the club, where the suspicious Gotti held his most private and incriminating conversations.
You tell this punk, I meet John Gotti, you sever your mother head off, you sucker.
I kept wondering what possible response the defense would have to that. How do you explain that your client has just said, when I whacked DB? How do you explain when he says, when I killed, you know why Louis DeBono is going to die? He's going to die because he didn't come in when I called him. How do you explain that?
I think that the sever the head remark was neutralized by its exposure for what it was, an overstatement, an extreme expression. We're not all that restrained in our everyday language, and this was everyday language for Mr. Gotti.
Gotti's language did not seem so everyday in other cases. On one tape, he said to his co-defendant, Frank Locascio, "Every time we got a partner that don't agree with us, we kill him." The trial lasted 2.5 months. The government's 1-2 punch of Gravano and the tapes had been a powerful combination. But in his closing statement, lead prosecutor Andrew Maloney nearly compromised his entire case. He warned the jury that if they were afraid of John Gotti, they had good reason. It was a highly prejudicial comment. The defense attorneys immediately called for a mistrial, claiming Maloney had poisoned the jury.
I thought I'd fall off the chair. I could not believe what I had heard. I have known Mr. Maloney too long and too well to believe that that remark was anything else other than a deliberate remark.
Think about it for a second. What possible motive could the lead prosecutor have in saying to the jury that we've just spent an hour, no, actually we spent a day asking them, please find this defendant guilty? What possible motive would we have for saying to him, oh, and by the way, if you do, he'll kill you?
Judge Glasser did not rule for a mistrial, and the jury found John Gotti guilty of racketeering and all the other counts, including the 3 murders. He was sentenced to life without parole. Frank Locascio was convicted on all counts except a minor gambling charge. After the sentencing, a crowd from Gotti's neighborhood erupted into a riot outside the courthouse, overturning U.S. Marshals' cars and attacking policemen. Gotti's fans were confident.
And I'll bet anybody in this world, whatever they want to bet, that this man wins the appeal.
Today, John Gotti is doing his time at Marion Federal Prison in southern Illinois. He's currently appealing his conviction to the U.S. Supreme Court. Sammy the Bull Gravano, on the other hand, has visited Washington, where he testified before Congress on the mafia's infiltration of professional boxing. In 1994, as a reward for testimony that prosecutors said led to almost 40 convictions, Gravano received his own sentence, 5 years.
So if everything works out perfect, he's got every thug in America out to kill him, and when he's 65, he can get out and try and keep out of their way until he dies. Along the way, he loses his family, his friends, his home. It beats life without parole, I'll admit that, but not by much.
My name is Salvatore Gravano. Early in my life, I was given the nickname Sammy the Bull. I have been in jail since December of 1990, when I was arrested with John Gotti. I was his underboss and second of command of the Gambino family.
Most mafia informers turn or flip only after they're out of range of the mob's lethal vengeance. But next, we'll hear from a stool pigeon who stayed in the mafia to exact his own revenge. This mob rat worked undercover for the FBI for 3 years, gathering evidence until he put a dozen fellow mobsters behind bars. The common image of a mafia stool pigeon is that of a man in a hushed courtroom surrounded by a wall of bodyguards. He turns on his former partners in crime from the relative safety of the witness protection program. But some mob rats take much bigger risks.
I wore body recorders for evidence. You know, I risked my life getting evidence. I didn't just go there and say, look, this guy did this guy did that, this guy did this.
Joseph "Joe Dogs" Iannuzzi, a Florida mobster from the Gambino family's heyday, put a dozen of his mafia pals behind bars for revenge. Born in 1931, Iannuzzi grew up in a New York City suburb. At the age of 14, Joe was already a smooth operator with a police record. He was a chip off the old block of his small-time bookie father.
I used to go around with him on a Saturday and pick up the number bets. My father wasn't a good father or anything, you know, he was, you know, a hustler. But my mother raised me good, you know, the best she could.
To straighten out, he joined the Army. He saw action in Korea and was wounded twice. But after his discharge, it wasn't long before he was picking up a quick illegal buck where he could, working with crooks on the fringe of the mob. By his 30s, Joe found himself living in West Palm Beach, Florida, with a wife and 3 kids, but no real career. As usual, he was on the outskirts of the underworld. That's when he met Gambino soldier Tommy Agro.
When I first met Agro, I thought I met the boss of the mob. He had such charm and class and sharp dresser and jewelry that, you know, he was my idol, you know, and I wanted to be just like him.
Tommy and Joe's relationship was a love-hate relationship. Tommy was much like an abusive father who loved his child.
In 1971, Tommy Agro was an up-and-coming mobster in the New York Gambino family. He was respected, meaning he was feared, and he was Iannuzzi's hero. To impress Agro, Joe took him to the dog track, a favorite haunt. After a successful day of betting, Agro gave Iannuzzi his official mob nickname, Joe Dogs.
Some kind of handle you had to have. Huh? Me, I was Joe Dogs. Before I was Joe Dogs, I was Joe Diner, you know. After Joe Diner, I was Joe Drywall. Yeah, it's...
For his mafia apprenticeship, Joe Dogs would seek out applicants for mob loans at 5% interest or juice each week, 300% a year. Soon, Joe was what authorities called Mr. Organized Crime in southern Florida. The New York Gambino family, then under boss Big Paulie Castellano, was establishing its control over the region. Joe Dogs became their mouthpiece and their muscle. It was a role he savored.
Forget about it. I felt like King Kong. I mean, you know, nobody could come near me. It's, you felt like Superman. I mean, really. I felt like I lived in a phone booth. It was a great feeling, yeah? A great feeling.
The mob runs on fear, and the fear inspired by the Gambinos helped Joe do his job.
Sometimes all it would take was a smack. So once in a while, I'd have to hurt somebody, you know. I'd have to hurt somebody if that person didn't know my reputation, for instance, right? Then I would have to really muscle them, you know.
In the company of his mafia master, Tommy Agro, Joe whiled away the hours with some of the best-known mafia sociopaths, including Tommy DeSimone, a killer made famous posthumously when Joe Pesci portrayed him in the film Goodfellas.
This guy was a real screwball. I mean, he'd kill you while you're having dinner together. He was a killer. He was a killer, and but he was a lot of fun.
When Joe and his friends weren't breaking legs or extorting protection money, their principal aim was leisure. They might win thousands of dollars on fixed horse races and spend it all on a few dates with their mistresses. But having fun Florida style and running errands for the mob weren't enough for Joe Dogs. He wanted to make his own profits, so he borrowed $60,000 from Agro. Joe Dogs made interest payments of his own to New York and loaned the money out at a higher juice rate. He had become a real operator. Everybody in southern Florida knew who Joe Dogs Iannuzzi was, including the FBI.
I decided that I would knock on Joe's door.
In 1978, FBI agent Larry Doss was investigating organized crime in southern Florida. That meant getting to know the local mobsters and recruiting prospective informants. To that end, Doss began cultivating a polite relationship with Joe Dogs.
And when Joe opens the door, he's standing there with a gun in his hand. He's got a .38 caliber blue steel revolver. I said, hi, I'm Larry Doss from the friendly FBI.
Doss thought Joe might be a good source for the FBI. The word on the street was that Joe was having problems with his mob connections. So Doss kept the pressure on, even when Joe left Florida to hide out in Chicago for a few months.
The phone rings, and it's Larry Doss on the phone. Jesus Christ. I said, what the hell you want, you pain in the ass? I mean, this guy's a dedicated, devoted and dedicated agent, all right? I said, what do you want, you pain in the ass? Leave me alone.
Joe was different than anybody that I'd ever dealt with. And even though he was a career criminal from New York, and I was a career FBI agent from Georgia, Joe liked me and I liked him.
And he gave me his home number. He said, listen, if you need me, here's my home number. And call me anytime, Joe, if you're in trouble. You know, he was a nice guy.
Joe needed money. He couldn't make the payments on his own loan because he was having trouble collecting money from his loan shark clients.
Joe had a sizable amount of money out with a local contractor on juice. Joe felt sorry for the guy, couldn't really bring himself to beat the guy up because he was behind on his payments. He had a wife and some kids, and Joe had known the guy for a long time.
Information on the mob is so important to the FBI that the Bureau is willing to pay its informants. Joe decided to start moonlighting as a rat. The money he got from the feds he sent to his New York boss, Tommy Agro, in place of the interest he owed. But the payments weren't enough, and Tommy Agro was getting fed up. In February 1981, Agro went down to Florida with two of his goons and called Joe Dogs to a meeting at a local restaurant.
I walk up to embrace him, shake hands and embrace him. How you tip, how you doing? And he's squeezing my hand, and I see an object coming towards my skull, and the next thing I knew, I was falling, you know, and being beat with and kicked.
When Joe Dogs came to, he was in the hospital, receiving last rites from a priest.
I laid in the hospital and cried for another 5 days. I couldn't believe what he had done to me. This guy that I worshipped. And I says, I'm gonna get even with this son of a bitch. If I gotta die doing it, I'm gonna get even. And that's what I did. I got even good.
With a recorder provided by the FBI, Joe Dogs began secretly taping his phone conversations with Agro, who was still calling him. It wasn't long before Agro fell into the trap. During one call, Iannuzzi goaded him into a screaming rage. It was the 25th call Joe had taped, now known as tape 25.
You ain't supposed to be alive. Because I was making an example out of you for any motherfucker that tried it on me again. You understand? So the only reason you're still alive, don't think because we stopped. It was because that woman walked in the door. Today you would have been gone. You weren't supposed to walk away no more. You me, and that was the worst thing you ever did.
So I get the tape the next day, and I play this tape, and it's absolutely the most unbelievable conversation you've ever heard. It's everything that the mob is, Tommy Agro was on this tape.
I got guys with me that'll eat your f***ing eyes out of your head. And they're as loyal as a mother. And they got balls the size of cows. I would take them tomorrow and tell them, come on, load up, we're going to blow this whole joint. They'll walk in and blast everybody. With no hesitation, no nothing, and don't look for nothing besides it.
With the tape 25, we had Tommy locked up, you know, for attempted murder. He admitted to it on the phone, the tape. But that was just the beginning.
Iannuzzi's mob bosses in New York still needed him as their Florida connection. Even as he was recovering from the beating they'd given him, they gave him a new assignment: to start an illegal gambling club with mob money. The FBI approved the project, provided Joe had a partner of their choosing. The Bureau picked Chicago agent John Bonino.
He is a perfect undercover agent. He's Italian, he's handsome, he's smooth, he's from the big city, he knows the mob in Chicago very well.
Piece of cake. You got in right away.
No, it didn't feel that easy to me. I spent probably the first 6 months with Joe, being tutored by Joe and listening and observing and duplicating a lot of those same traits in the other people.
John Bonino would